So, the white man has always tried to take over the world, conquering other nations, using religion to raise whole cultures, saying that they are the chosen ones by God, saying that they have divine authority to do whatever they want. Is that true? It has always been like that? Is that as harmful as we think we are? Spoiler, most likely, but in order to talk about that, we have a couple of guests today, and we're going to be talking about colonialism. Please, sir, that beautiful intro. And today we have representing the white man, the evil imperialist of the country, the Mr. American, Sir Hain. How are you, sir?
I'm good, thank you. Good to meet you again.
Ready to conquer this chat today? Let's see if we can do it.
I'll try not to.
And you have here your dear Teo El Ateo, a victim of colonialism, and of course we need another victim of this terrible thing, Mr. Sandrith XY, Indian Atheist. How are you, sir?
I am doing fine, ready to battle
Sure.
colonialism.
Tell me, are your ancestors also victims of this terrible thing that we're going to be talking about today, the colonialism?
Yes, we have been, and in fact, like the whole country of India was. But the funny thing is, the part of India I am from, that was the entry point for the British. So that's where they started and expanded all of India.
Wow. So here we have, as you can see, South America talking about how the Catholic Church decided to destroy the whole culture in here. We have an American who can tell us about how the system and the thing was under the British rulers over there, because in here it was, Spain and Catholics. Over there it was British and the Protestants. And Sandrith, who can tell us also about British and, the interesting job they did over there. I think it would be interesting for you to start, dear Sandrith. I would love to learn more about how colonialism destroyed so many things over there.
Yeah, definitely. For in case of India, the difference is like the main colonial force was Britain. They were not the first one. Like Portuguese were the first one. French also had a visit here. The Spanish also had a visit here. But the colonialism mostly came from Britain. The Portuguese had a small operation. They had a better understanding with the local people. Maybe that would have changed in a longer period, but they didn't get the chance because British took over and they pushed them out. Like we still have some places where they have some influence, like Goa and Portugal. I think the name Portugal somewhat came from Portuguese. I'm not sure about that. That's just a theory at the moment. And unlike in places like Africa and America with the Indians and stuff, Britain did not use religion much here because we already had a religious conflict going on between several communities here. They just took advantage of that. They, of course, spread Christianity here as well, put up churches and all, but they didn't need that much because they had other things going. They had the advantage of taking, diplomatic ties with several kings against other kings and then taking over them. So that went pretty well. Enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of theory. Pretty effective.
Quite interesting. In here, actually, it was kind of different because here religion was used to destroy everything. First, there was a physical genocide in here where lots of people were murdered, straight up murdered, killed, or enslaved, and the whole culture was erased. Actually, there is a guy I want to quote. What was his name? I wrote it around here. Diego Lambda. When he was talking about what happened in Yucatan, because he was a kind of a priest of that place, he said, the first step to erase a people or a population is erasing their memory, destroying their books, their culture, their history. Then make somebody write new books, manufacture a new culture, create a new story. Soon the nation will start forgetting what it is and what it was, and the world around them will forget them even faster. This is the guy who decided to destroy all the Mayan literature because he obviously wanted all of that to disappear because it was obviously evil and, superstitions because their religion was the only right one. And This happened in the whole continent. Whole civilizations were erased just like that by the power of the conquerors. And it saddens me a lot. Later, I will talk about how some specific gods were turned into religious figures, and that's the reason why there are so many saints in South America. But obviously, I don't want to take the whole show, and I'm sure our dear and beloved white man in here, Mr. Hain. This is only sarcasm, people. I love Hain. I'm sure you have a lot to say about this, right?
Well, first let me make a bit of a correction on what you said. I'm Dutch. I live in the Netherlands. I'm not American. But the Netherlands was a major player in world colonialism. Not the size of France and Britain, but maybe third or fourth. I don't know, sorry, Spain, of course. Fourth, fifth, something like that. I mean, we colonized, we the Dutch, that is, colonized bits of North America. New York is possibly well known. In South America, bits of Brazil, but we were kicked out of that by the Portuguese. Bits of what is still a Dutch-speaking country in South America, Suriname. Only got independent in 1975. And had quite a few, at least trading posts, of really colonies in Africa and India, and a major colony in what was the Dutch East Indies and what is now Indonesia. So, and yes, I mean, most of it was trade, but in Indonesia, eventually it turned into a full colony, let's say, like India was a colony of Britain, with based on exploitation, racism. And there was a religious part to that, that both Catholics and Protestants started missions there with varying success. But we'll get back to that.
Cool. For some reason, I knew that you were not American, or I just remembered that. But hey, we needed an American example. If we don't have one, I will talk about that. In the USA, it was kind of similar because, you know, if you watch Westerns, you will see these poor Puritans who were just arriving to the country and they had to fight these evil natives who were fighting them. Well, the natives were just defending their town. They were being exterminated. And according to the laws of the white man, they were allowed to murder any native who would dare to try to protect their land. So yeah, those movies, you can look at them with a different point of view, and you will see that natives they were the victims. They were being killed. They were being totally destroyed. Their whole land was taken. All their beliefs were erased. A new religion was imposed to them. And please, I know that Westerns are not documentaries, of course, but try to watch them, and you will see three things in every Western town. A bar, a church, and prostitutes. And you will see that in every single town, because the church was the first thing to be built around it. And the other two that I mentioned, well, you know, instincts. People kind of want that. Oh, yeah, and the sheriff office, but not all towns had sheriffs. So all towns had a church, but not all of them had a sheriff. Kind of interesting. So I don't know what you think about this, guys, but I do blame religion for a lot of the atrocities that were committed under colonialism. And I think that colonialism wouldn't have been as successful as it was without religion erasing all the culture of people. They definitely erased their culture. They erased their reasons to be proud of who they were. And I'm going to quote... I have a friend from Mexico, and we were talking about this recently, and she gave me some of her opinions that I want to quote. And she says that over there, and actually it also happens in the rest of South America. In here, we have some similar things as well. But she mentions how in history, when the white invader arrived, yes, I will keep joking about white people. When they arrived, they started to impose their culture, impose everything. And something interesting happened in here. In the USA, the people would arrive and would murder everyone and would reproduce between each other and, prostitutes in every town. In South America, no. In South America, they could just come here, take all the land, and they could rape the women, the native women. So then there started to be born a lot of mixed children, mixed race children. So people started trying to believe that they were all, from Spain because they were quotation mark the superior, whatever, the superior invader. And as a result, they started to see as inferior all the indigenous people from here. And then there was this weird contradiction where they decided, oh yeah, we're so proud of our ancestors, but we are totally not like them. We are totally not native. No, I'm totally white. My ancestors happen to be from this land. That's it. And I don't know if you have been to South America. Nowadays it's less common, but until a couple of decades ago, whenever you went to a church, you could see people walking in front of the church and making the cross sign with their fingers. That is called persinarse in Spanish. You could see it all through South America. In Mexico still is pretty common. And that is for two reasons. Once because people are still very religious and, it's a kind of a show of respect. But another one was because back in the time, if you didn't do that, you were going against religion and you could be arrested and murdered sometimes. Because indigenous people was being forced to worship this new deity. So of course, if they were in front of the church and they saw the cross, they had to make the cross sign, to worship Jesus or whatever. And if you didn't do that, you were a rebel and you deserved the worst. So people, of course, everybody had to do that, and they started seeing us something terrible not to do it. So there you have a couple of examples of how the religious ideas obliterated the original culture and imposed themselves through violence and hatred.
Yeah. How did things like that go in India? I mean, I have comments to make, but I don't want to impose me on the conversation. So let's hear India. Sorry.
Yes, definitely. But before that, I want to add on that. Another easy tactic that the colonialism used with the religion thing is that they often sent missionaries. Like missionary system was to spread religion, not exactly colonialism, but they used it as an excuse to spread colonialism. The system was like they would send missionaries to spread religion, and sometimes they would be opposed. And once they would be opposed or they would be attacked because they were forcing it onto them, then they would use that as a sign of act of war and then send armies as an excuse of that and have a via medium to and as an excuse to start the colony there. That was a system that used in some places. I'm not sure they used this technique on Latin America, but they used this technique a lot in the Asian places. Not exactly India, more towards the other Eastern Asian places, wherever maybe Indonesia, I'm not sure, but some places like the smaller countries of today. And in India, it was a bit different because it started with the portal regions as trade, and when they didn't exactly need to force the religion, what happened was they already had different communities and different kingdoms fighting among each other. So they just took advantage of that. Religion came into much later practice, and in case of the influence of church, they had two different kind of influences. One was, which is something that still happens today. They target the poverty-stricken regions where they lure people using infrastructure, schooling, fooding, lodging, stuff like that, and then use that as an excuse to convert people like accept Christianity and you get those advantages. And to be honest, if I was in that bad of a place, I might have just accepted it. Food is food. I need food to survive. Stuff like that. And another thing is, since the British were the superior in terms of technical advantage and the lifestyle they had after taking over stuff from Indians, that developed a superiority complex among Britain. And the thing Theo mentioned about people wanting to be like the colonials and trying to be better than the native place and have a superiority influence. That's something also happening in India, and a bit of it is also there today, but not as extreme as it is in Latin America because there is a lot of languages here. Like instead of battling with one language, they had to battle with multiple languages. So that didn't exactly happen. It had a more gradual state. What they used in terms of religion as a weapon was more like using instigating people of one community against other, and then scavenging on the whatever left after they battled each other. It's like the most common conflict back then, which is still a bit today, is the conflict between Hindus and Muslims. Because when the Britain came in, the biggest empire was the Mughal Empire, and there were many Hindu empires fighting against them to either conquer parts of Mughal empires or protect their empires, or they were also fighting with each other. So British came in and sided with one community at one place, took over, then took over that community as well, and some other community in some other place and stuff like that. And they also offered protection to some smaller kingdoms that you come join with us, be a part of British system, and we will protect you against the kings around you. That is something that happened in places like there's a small district called Kuchbihar. So it was that's the place I'm native to. So they never fought the British. They just joined the British under the protection bracket system. So they sided with British. They didn't exactly fight each other. The British protected them against other kingdoms. So they were pretty safe. Much didn't happen back then. But the main use was one community against other. That was the most effective system they used. Then there's also the problem of casteism in India that still prevails, but it was in a much worse state back then. So they also took advantage of that. Just they found the evils already there and took advantage of that and increased that, and just they did what they do business. They were pretty smart, to be honest. They took advantage of everything they could.
Yeah. I recognize bits of that in Indonesia, then the Dutch East Indies. There's roughly two parts to Dutch colonial time in history. One is till roughly 1800. That's the Dutch East India Company was essentially the boss in the East Indies. They had a government-given right to declare war, to do trade, to make treaties. They employed local people for their armies. They had full rights in that. In 1800, in the French time, that changed because, well, first of all, the Dutch Republic ended, and the British took over the Dutch East Indies because they were at war with France, and the Dutch was occupied by France, the Netherlands. So the Dutch couldn't do that anymore. But after the British took quite a few Dutch colonies, but we got Indonesia back. And after that, at that moment, most of the colony was trading posts throughout. And Indonesia is huge. It doesn't look very big on the map, but that's because it's on the equator. It's huge. And so that's many, many thousands of kilometers from east to west, and all along the coast, trading posts. And from that moment on, the Dutch started to treat with local kingdoms and little empires and very tiny bits, essentially to either rule them into Dutch rule or go to war with the other ones. And through all the 1800s, 1900s, well into the 1920s, there was always some war going on, where bits of Indonesia were being conquered. And the last bit was Aceh, that's the northernmost part of what's the name? Sumatra. Till this day, a difficult bit of Indonesia. Now a bit on religion. When the Dutch arrived, in the Indies, what's now Indonesia, was mostly Muslim. Muslim entered Indonesia with Arab trade around 1000, something like that. But there were a few bits of Hinduism and even Buddhism left.
Yeah,
Some
Hinduism is still present. Like both Hinduism and Buddhism are still part of Indonesia. Like they are not as big as
no,
some part
but
period of history, but they are
for
still. I
yes,
think second, third, something like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
the island of Bali is mostly Hindu.
Yeah. Actually, Bali is the place where the Hindu kings entered Indonesia from. Like, there's also a popular kind of story that almost turned into folklore now that is called Bali Yatra. Yatra is journey, basically. That's when the some Hindu Indian kings traveled to Indonesia and started the kingdom or trade there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for instance, on Java, there's still a huge Buddhist temple. I mean, it's a ruin and it's been restored, but in, let's say, around 1000, in a modern calendar, it was a major Buddhist temple and community. There's very little left of that. But to this day, Indonesia is mostly Muslim, and the East India Company tried to do a bit of missionary work, or more like missionaries tried to tack on to the trade, and through, let's say, founding schools for the locals, they got some traction, but only in, well, a few bits, let's say the Moluccas. The Moluccas, that's the northeasternmost part of the archipelago. And after 1800, when the Dutch state took over the colony, essentially, Catholics eventually got some rights to send missionaries, but that didn't stick.
Guys, I think that I made a mistake when we started, because we started talking straight away about the effect of colonialism. And maybe there are people watching us who don't know what colonialism is. So maybe we should start by defining what colonialism is and
Okay.
why we are saying that it's being so harmful as well. Kane, if you want to take it.
Yeah. As I see it, colonialism is essentially taking over foreign nations for exploitation.
Beautiful. Well, and based on that, I wanted to, I will talk about Spain a lot today. And I want to use Spain as the perfect sample. Yes, I know the British is much better because of all the things in the British Museum. But Spain was known for a while as the kingdom. Was it the kingdom? Yeah, I think it was the kingdom. The kingdom where the sun doesn't set. Because it was so big and it had so much territory that, in one place it was the morning and on the other side it was night. So then the sun would go around, or the planet would, turn around and the sun would be on the other side, and it could be the opposite. So if you say, okay, that part, Philippines is Spain, and right now in here it might be night, but in Philippines it's morning. So obviously the sun is not setting in Spain because of how huge it is. And I always mention Philippines because do you know how Philippines was called before it was taken over by Spain?
No.
Me neither. I have no idea. Nobody who I asked knows that without going to Google. And do you know why it's called Philippines?
Oh, after some King Philip of Spain.
Because of King Philip of Spain. The guy literally took a whole place, a whole area, put his name in there, and it's called Philippines until nowadays.
I'm not quite certain which Philip. I think it's Philip II, but I may be wrong. That's the one we had a lot to do with in the 1500s.
I'm not sure. I thought it was fourth, but I will have to check that later. But the thing is that Philippines is an Asian country. They speak as Tagalog with their own language, but they have a lot of Spanish words in there. Their whole culture has been poisoned by Spanish ideas, culture, and religion. They still kind of have their own mythology, but totally mixed with the Spaniard one. And you can find people who are extremely religious over there. from a religion that was imposed to them and stayed there until nowadays. Their culture was destroyed. Most of their interesting lore or folklore was totally obliterated. They remember almost nothing. And most of their culture nowadays, you can see a lot of parallels with, I'm going to say, South American culture, that is also a nation conquered by Spain. It's kind of weird, but we are very similar, and we are on the other sides of the world. So that's how how harmful colonialism is.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And if you compare about the Spanish system colonialism and the British one, then I would say there's a difference in the amount of use of religion to colonialize, because back in those days, Spain was extremely religious. We know about the Spanish Inquisitions and stuff like that. While the colonialism of British was more towards the business side, just this is for profit, this is for that. Religion was relatively secondary. The religion mostly came about using it to, instigate one group about against another, and then we can then taking over, not directly establishing a Christian country or stuff like that. That I
Well,
think is a difference between these two
yeah, and
colonies.
you know what? That give us a third interesting point to talk about, because the thing is how they decided to conquer. So British decided to arrive to a place, erase everything, murder everybody, so they could erase all the culture there, and then they would bring their own culture, their own people. So of course, in that case, religion was used only to keep their population, the ones that they are bringing from the old continent, keep them under the religious leash, but they don't have to do anything because they are bringing their own religion. And yeah, of course, every single town has their own church because that's what they already want. However, Spain didn't do that because they used a different approach. And please remember what I said. British could arrive and could erase everything and could bring their own people. That created another problem that I'm going to talk about after the Spaniard approach. Spaniards would come here, they would take prisoners, they would turn the original population into slaves. So when they brought religion, religion was so important because religion was used to indoctrinate these people, make them docile, and make them obedient servants and slaves. And that's the point I want to talk about. For Spaniards, the original natives were their slaves. That's why you see Afro-American people only in certain tropical parts of South America, because over there is where the British arrived. And British are the ones who decided, okay, let's kill everybody and let's bring our own slaves. And they started, this is going to sound terrible, but importing people from Africa. And they brought a lot of people against their will. They created this huge, let's call it migratory problem, where they brought lots of people that had no rights, were not even considered people, and later they suddenly are humans, and now they have nothing and nowhere to go, and they are trapped in this new continent. And those are a lot of problems that we have to talk in another show. But that was kind of the main reason why the Spaniards made religion such an important point in their conquer, because their religion became the most powerful weapon to obtain free workers, or just slaves, to get free slaves, either sex slaves or working slaves or whatever. And they used all these people as material, and they erased their whole culture and all their memory using this new religion. And later I will give some examples of how they did that, but I don't want to talk the whole show, so I don't know if you want to say something about this.
Yeah, I recognize bits of this. I mean, earlier I talked about Indonesia. Now, when we go to the Dutch in the Americas, well, the bit in North America was pretty close to how the British did it. Essentially, buying, that is at least how Dutch called it, lands from the natives who didn't have a concept of land ownership. So essentially they were evicted and thrown out. I don't think enslaving natives was a big thing there. It was, however, in the Caribbean. To this day, there are a few Dutch islands in the Caribbean. they are independent countries formally within the kingdom, but they're small populations. They can sort out their own mess, but there's still a Dutch governor there who, if the mess gets too bad, he can rule, essentially, a governor. And no, not a local person, a Dutch person being the governor.
Yeah, that is also that is a system that they imposed on India as well. Like instead of removing people completely, bringing their own people, what they did is they took advantage of the existing systems and put the governing part of the system under British. Like just hence say they would put governors on top of existing governments who would just supervise and collect taxes and make things run according to the British and stuff like that. Well, the work would be done by the existing rulers, landlords, stuff like that. They didn't, for example, British has a very strict tax system, and but they didn't enslave people. They let that part of the thing being handled by the Indians themselves, like killing poor people, torturing poor people to extract tax, stuff like that. The British didn't come and do that. They just made sure that the Indians themselves did this to other Indians, while they just sit back, governed and made sure they're just getting the money they wanted. That's all.
Yeah, pretty much. Sorry, I wasn't completely. There's a bit more to at least the Caribbean islands that the Dutch took. There were quite a bit, and quite a few changed ownership for quite a bit. And there was Suriname, the country between British Guiana and French Guiana, that was Dutch Guiana, or we call it Suriname. And that was conquered in the 1600s, something like that. Changed hands a bit, but in its modern form, I think it was. We got it in the modern form when we ceded New York to the British. The Vrede van Rijswijk. Sorry, I'm repeating my history book now because. Anyway, that's not the big thing. The big thing is there was a existing Indian population, as we call them, Indians, and weirdly enough, they're still called Indians. I'm not proud of that, but it's the word we use. And the Dutch tried to enslave them, but they didn't like that, so they moved to the inner part of the country, and it's Suriname to this day is just a big jungle, with only a very tiny bit on the coast is being inhabited. And so they moved into the jungles, which they knew, and that was that. So the Dutch imported African slaves, and after slavery was abandoned, Indian and Javanese and Chinese coolies. It's a terrible word, I know that. I hope I don't. I don't want to offend, but that's the name then used. Contract laborers. As a matter of fact, Indian contract laborers, their descendants live in Suriname and in the Netherlands to this day, and are weirdly enough our main Hindu population.
Huh. I wasn't aware of that. I'm not surprised though, I just didn't know about it. Yeah. And what India has a very significant location geographically, because it connects a lot of places and it has a very different kind of weather in different places. So it's very it has a very advantageous geographical location. And that is something the British were aware of. And that is a reason that India has been, invaded by many different regions. Like the Mughals themselves did not originate in India; they came from outside. Before that, there were many other empires. Lodis were there, then Mongols also, but Mongol did not set up an empire here. So stuff like that. But the difference between the British and the other people was that they came in, conquered, and became part of the system. Like they did not take from here and then made things disappear and just what should I say? Like live like a parasite. They become part of the system. Like
Yeah.
for example, when the British came, as I said, the biggest empire was the Mughal Empire, but the Mughal Empire was part of India itself. Like they weren't taking from India and sending stuff to some other place. So that was the major difference. While I think British came in something around 17 or 1800. I think 1800, like mostly around 1800. And back then, India was like third or fifth richest places of the world in those time. But by the time British left, India was down to I don't know some 7, 10, something like that place. Like they had a very major impact on the economic scale of India. That that sent us quite a few years back.
Yeah. So I think that one of the big differences between Spain on the one hand and the Dutch and the British or the English maybe really not both are true. The British and the Dutch started out as mostly trade, so essentially getting stuff out of their colonies, as in spices, gold, rubber later. What more did we have? Metals, and more stuff like, Chinese porcelain. The Dutch traded huge amounts of Chinese porcelain through the Dutch East Indies and Africa and back to Europe. In huge amounts. And that was a very profitable trade. But it really got going after 1800 when the system of forced labor for local people was introduced. Essentially, they tacked onto an existing system where peasants in local empires were made to do work for their lord. Essentially, the Dutch took that over, but now they did the work for us. And most of that was plantation work.
Yes.
That was when things really became profitable.
Yeah. And unlike the people who were already there, the British didn't care about what happened to the population because once their work is done, they don't have to live there.
Yes.
So some of the major plantation work they did was this is something called Neil plant. Back then the color blue was coming from a particular plant. I'm forgetting the scientific name. In India, it's called as Neil because blue is Neil in Hindi and Bengali.
I know the word, but I can't. Doesn't spring to mind at the moment.
Yeah. So
Indigo.
let's say
Indigo.
huh?
Indigo.
Indigo. Yeah. Perfect. Thanks. Yeah, it was an indigo plant. And the thing about indigo plant is it's very hard on the land. And once you start planting indigo plant, it's difficult to have agriculture after that. So instead of doing that in their places, they forced the Indian farmers to do it, but they didn't come and force the Indian farmers themselves. They forced the landlords to produce this some kind of amount for them, which was impractical. They knew it was impractical, but they didn't care because they didn't have to, handle the aftermath of whatever happens. They just forced it onto the kings, the landlords, and stuff. And then they went on to torture the people into producing that because they didn't want to lose the status of being allies of Britain and have their forces come and take them over or have them side with some other empire or some other competing landlord beside them and have them take over. So they just torture their own people to have a happy relationship with the British. So yeah, plantation works kind of started towards the second half of the colonial period. It started with just trade and ports and stuff like that. And yes, that was the phase when it majorly started to be very profitable for them.
Yes. And in respect to that, the Spanish, when they went into, particularly in South America, well, first of all, they were. The first ship had priests on board. The trying to convert the natives had been bit of their plan from the get-go. And they were mostly after silver and gold, but that kind of cargo, not trade goods or something of that. So in that respect, the Spanish did it in a much more, or invaded and colonized much more directly.
Oh yeah, actually, the main reasons why they were so keen on, taking slaves and forcing them to work on mines is because when they arrived here, they saw all these beautiful civilization like Incas with their gold, other nations and all of that. That's why Incas created the myth of El Dorado, so they could go and start searching for this mythical city that didn't exist. And yeah, actually, this type of abusive way of using people and taking all the resources from the country, it continued until the revolution, until the independence in here, because back then taxes were extremely high. Everything that you were taking from the land, you were supposed to send a huge amount to the Spaniard crowd, because you were a colony, so you are supposed to be sending them all the resources. And that is one of the reasons why most countries decided to go for their independence in here, and they fought against the Spaniard invaders. Quite interesting, all of that. And it's amazing how greed in both places, in both sides, generated this obviously this fight.
Yeah.
It's all about greed. Oh, I hear some weird noise in the background.
Is that yours?
Oh yeah, it's from the road.
It's a car that's blowing this horn.
Yeah, it's a truck that's going. It's a 1 or 2 minute thing. Yeah.
Never mind. I'll try to ignore it. I was talking about exploitation, and in the Dutch East Indies, the plantation work was mostly coffee, tea, rubber.
Rubber too. Yeah.
Rubber was very profitable.
Rubber was something that they mainly focused in the southern part of India.
If I remember correctly, in the decades before the Second World War, Indonesia, or Dutch East Indies, was the largest producer of natural rubber in volume.
Yeah.
And that was hugely profitable. I learned about in university the exploitation, particularly of the contract laborers, was terrible. They were slaves but in name. Do you still hear me?
Yeah, we are waiting for you. I thought you were going to say something.
Okay, it was a bit. The noise stopped, so. Now I understand. Ooh, that's a bit of a. He's back.
Yeah, you're not taking him away, sir.
Nope.
We want him here.
Yeah. So anyway, that it was called. Anyway, a system of exploitation that was very, very efficient. Essentially, local people had to work something like 100 days a year for government plantations. And the other time of year was enough to keep them alive, essentially being farmers mostly. And the terrible thing is that the local lords still extracted labor and taxes from the farmers as well. They were highly exploited. Something like maybe 10% of their work benefited themselves, and the rest was extracted.
Yes, totally. Tax and materials was the main form of governance in India, and the focus of the plantation depended on the region of India. Like some parts was good for tea, some parts was good for indigo, some parts was good for rubber, stuff like that. And while the Spanish were after the gold, silver, and stuff like that directly, for British it wasn't that, because although India had a huge, reserve of those precious metals as well, but it wasn't something that was on public display. Like it was something that the higher kings, the royal family possessed. So it wasn't something you could see displayed everywhere. So that is something they extracted from them indirectly in form of tax or something like that, or maybe during the conquest when they are siding with some king that won against some other king, which was the common enemy, stuff like that. But for the local population, it was the taxation and the materials. And when it just came down to establishing infrastructure. For example, the British set up their an extensive system of railway. That is something the British handled directly. So it was stuff like that where the British directly handled them and they directly murdered people. But other than that, it was mostly having other people do it for them. And they themselves didn't exactly impose religion, but they facilitated missionaries. Like it wasn't that the company or the British government, not government, I think it was a kingdom back then. The British kingdom itself spread Christianity. They just made a not profit, made a safe ground for missionaries to do that on the side. So that's how Christianity spread on the side.
Yeah, that sounds very much like the Dutch ideas on that. I mean, not too long ago I saw some bits about 17th century missionaries in the East Indies. That was, I mean, it was a very small scale bit, and they made very little headway. I mean, first of all, of course, the people there were Muslims, and they had no interest in Christianity whatsoever. They knew what Christians were. I mean, one of the good things from a Muslim perspective is through the Hajj, people learn how things are within the Muslim world everywhere. And, Haji are always have been and still are highly respected in Indonesia. As a matter of fact, they use it in the name. It is highly respected, and it's definitely something that, yes, when the Christians arrived in Indonesia, the Muslims knew what they were dealing with.
Yeah, in actually that's true. That's true because the Muslims have already been in conflict with Christianity before, unlike the other religions in the regional religions like Hinduism in case of India. So they didn't have much control over that. In India, what the missionaries mainly targeted two kind of communities. One who are a bit tribal, who are not part of some other major religion itself, or they're targeting the lower strata of some religion. For example, in case of Hinduism, they're mainly targeting the Dalits and the lower caste who are very oppressed by the system they are into. So for them, Christianity is like an escape from that oppression. So that's who they target here. Like they're not successful. If someone comes and a missionary comes and tries to convert upper caste in the population, they wouldn't be interested. They're already in privilege. Why should they need Christianity for? But if they target a community that is oppressed in the system, then they might feel like, okay, it seems better than what I have. Like at least no one's coming and bothering me. But then they rather get not hesitant. They rather get obstacles from the upper caste, like preventing some other outsider to come and take away their class that they can oppress. They don't want to share the class they are oppressing. The common ruler class mentality. So that's how it works here. For example, Christianity has influence in mainly two parts of India. It is spread across India, like it is the third major religion here, but it is mostly some parts of southern India and some parts of northeastern India, where the minority community has a higher population percentage than the majority community. So that's where the targeting comes from. Although it's spread, but it's they don't have much influence here in terms of political and power related stuff like that.
Theo?
Sorry. Yes?
What I was wanting to ask you was that sorry. I first wanted. What is there still stuff left in, let's say, where you live, of languages that were spoken before Conquista, religious practices, stuff like that? Or
You
is
mean
it,
if there is something from before?
yeah, or is it just wiped out Catholics to go?
No, it's more Catholics. I mean, yeah, there are people nowadays trying to salvage some things, trying to rescue some of the old cultures. There are some ideas about spirits and stuff like that that some native groups are trying to save. But basically, if you go to any country in South America, you can find the same Catholic imposed culture over there in all those places. So, like, you have to go with to very specific small groups to find shamans trying to uh, remember or recapture what used to be before the Catholic Church arrived. But I would say that most culture is very hegemonic in the religious sense, and you can find the same religious type of people among the whole continent because they were conquered by the same type.
Yeah, and how's
Mexico is
that with
oh
languages? Did
yeah no
any
we're
native languages survive?
No, they didn't survive. They are trying to rescue them. Okay, there are some small groups that still kind of speak their own language in all the countries around here, but there are still very small groups. They are disappearing and will speak Spanish. However, we do have some words and that's why South America is so interesting because each country we all speak Spanish, yes, but in different ways and with different cultures because we all use words that come from the natives. But once again, we can still speak a pretty neutral Spanish and understand each other, except for the specific terms. I wanted to say that Mexico is kind of one of those places where they are trying to maintain the most that they can of some native cultures that they had, but at the same time they have mixed so many things. For example, the Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, that is a typical Catholic culture, Catholic tradition that was mixed with the Mayan mythology, and that's why they believe and they have all this colorful stuff and their own version of. It's not even hell; it's just like the limbo where you go before going to hell, and all of that. And it's because the Catholic Church did that when they realized, okay, these people they have their own beliefs and all of that. They tried to mix them with the Catholic things. Kukulkan, for example, or Quetzalcoatl for Mayans. No, Mayans is Kukulkan, and for Aztec is Quetzalcoatl. Or the other way around, I don't remember. Somebody will correct me later. The Spaniards arrived here and they said, oh no, but this is a man sent by God, so probably it's just, one of the prophets from the Bible. Or they decided to take there is a deity that I don't remember his name, but they just took him and decided to turn him into the image of Christ as a baby. There was another god, I think it was called Tepeaca or something like that, where it's what Tepeaca because they couldn't pronounce the right name and of the place, and there was a goddess called Tonantzin, to whom the natives would offer sacrifices, and they changed that into the Virgen de Guadalupe, which is just a virgin, and that's it, a very famous one. Because here in South America is so weird. Every country has their own version of the Virgin Mary, but with different names. And in different countries, you have different versions of each one of them in different regions of the country. It's so crazy and weird. And it's because of that, because the Spaniards tried to do that thing of mixing all cultures, erasing the original ones and replacing it with the Catholic ideals. So, you have this God? Well, this is represented in the Bible, so it must be Jesus, obviously. And look at this. This is your new idol that you have to worship. And once again, that's why we have so many virgins and saints in all South America.
In India, what they have been rather successful is establishing a British system of education. Like they did this because India has way too many languages. Like you come from one region to another, the major mode of communication changes, and it can get very confusing. Like even for Indians, we don't know all the languages. Like I am trilingual, and I understand a fourth language, but I still can't speak the fourth language, which is where I live at currently. But we understand each other, so it's working fine. But that is very tiny portion. Like there will be 20 plus languages or something like that. So what the British did is they forced their own system of education onto Indians for mainly two reasons. One, because they wanted to impose their culture like any other colonial people do. And second, they needed intermediaries who can work for them, translate for them, and be their via medium for controlling the population. Like you cannot talk to a population if you don't have a communication. Like there was a huge communication gap. That was mainly the goal. Reaching the goal was the main reason for them establishing an education system, and that has been very successful because the British system of education is still the major form of education here. Like we don't call it the same thing, but it is the system established by them. Like a little changes from that era, but it's still the same system. It is the major system here. And compared to the local systems that didn't stand the test of time because of two reasons. One is that it was an easy way to get into the British jobs back then, and now it is an easy way to get into overseas jobs because India is a developing country, and a huge portion of India's income comes from outsourcing works from the Western world. So the British education is a wide medium to get jobs, and that is why it is attractive, and that is why it works. And to be honest, it is, even if you remove that part of the equation, that it is actually had the original idea of enforcing a different culture onto a different culture. It is a bit better than the local forms of education, the traditional forms, because it got outdated. While this is something that kept in touch with the global requirements, and so it is a better form of education anyway. But that has been the success story for British, and through that, Christianity has a secondary influence because it was part of the education, but not in the form that we know in America, like where people, native Indians were, detached from country and completely, what is that called? Detention centers or something? Re-education or something. I think that is the kind of term, re-education or something around that, where they were indirectly uh, detached from the culture and changed into their picture of, well, like their culture, and then sent back, giving a very weird scenario. And that is something extremely forced on. Well, here it wasn't exactly forced on, but something that catch on because the British hold a better kind of life than what the Indians had. So that was attractive because it was an escape from being oppressed. And it was also a symbol of privilege and status because initially it is something that only the ruling class could do, and then it became accessible to the non-ruling class as well. So it was a way to climb the social ladder, and that was the main attraction. But not many people are aware of the course; they just see as profits that they can have.
Yeah, I mean, in something similar happened in the Dutch East Indies. The Dutch had two problems which they needed to take care of. They needed people with a reasonable good education, and they had a problem with mixed race people who children of Dutch people and native people, and they were in, well, let's say roughly around 1800, 1850, they became a reasonably sized part of the population, and they felt themselves better than the natives, but unfortunately, the Dutch East Indies was very racist. They were quite full Europeans. Indos, they were called, and essentially they were shoved in as something like middle management in in the society, and so they got the better jobs in companies. but never directors, stuff like that. But they needed, of course, a school system. And so roughly around 1900, a Dutch, how do you say that, format education system was introduced in the Indies. Bits of that still exist in Indonesia. For instance, they still use Dutch academic titles.
Yeah, a part of the education system was, making people feel that what they are coming from is wrong and outdated, and what they're being educated into is something the correct path, the only way, stuff like that. So that gave them a superiority complex, and that differentiates in society. And if you look at the ruling class of the British period, they look more like the British than the Indians they are. So that is something they try to assimilate themselves into the British culture to feel better, to feel superior than the people around them. That did happen. That was the most successful assimilation program of British.
Yeah,
I would say.
I mean, there's a weird bit to that. I mean, for me, the example is Sukarno, the first president of Indonesia. He was an engineer. He was got an engineering university education here in the Netherlands, in Delft. There's a technical university here, and he was apparently a very bright student. He got in. He came from affluent parents, but got into the school system there, and apparently a bright man, got studies in the Netherlands, returned an engineer, and almost single-handedly got the independence movement in Indonesia rolling, and became, after independence, the first president. And that's something that I want to talk about a bit more. Independence from the colonizers. As I understand it, in Mexico, that was a rather painful business. Dale?
I couldn't hear you. Sorry, I had a problem with my audio. Can you repeat that?
Oh, yeah. I was talking, I mean, we're getting to the hour, a bit to decolonization. I mean, in India and Indonesia, it happened in roughly the same time after World War II, through slightly different things. I mean, in Indonesia, there was a war of independence. In India, you got the partition, but as I understand it, in South America, decolonization happened a bit earlier.
Oh yeah, in here we always try to copy the USA. So one of the things that we started to copy from them was when they decided to
just USA but tinted yellow.
Sorry?
USA but tinted yellow.
In the what?
USA but with a yellow tint. You know the movie reference.
No, I don't. Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe you should.
I have to give a little context. Like, if you see any Hollywood movie or any series made in USA, then a common trope is when they show a scene in Mexico, then suddenly everything becomes yellow tinted.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You don't watch Hollywood? I mean, you don't have to, but it's something everyone watches. So anything for US entertainment, Hollywood or series or
Hollywood?
Netflix, something like that.
Yes.
Hollywood. So you haven't noticed that if there are scenes that is taking place in multiple places, like in America and also in Mexico, and when the scenes in Mexico is shown, then there is a yellow tint in the color scheme. Which is very funny.
Somebody told me about that recently. Yeah, I never realized that, but yeah, apparently it's kind of
never noticed.
Yeah, like they put a yellow filter on top of it. I don't know why.
Yeah, something like that. Like, once you notice it, it becomes very funny. So yeah, that was the joke, but without context, it cannot work. But now that you know, you can try watching something like that. Maybe Breaking Bad had this. Did you watch Breaking Bad? Not just Breaking Bad. It is a very common trope. I cannot give you exact names, but you should be able to notice it in multiple places. I think Breaking Bad also has that.
Yeah, I should have known because somebody told me about that recently. They showed me the picture and I was like, oh, what the heck? But yeah, then they do stuff like, oh, somewhere in South America, and they just show any slums from the USA, and oh, that looks awful. It's South America. Or they go to one country and they say it's another country, stuff like that. It's like, okay, whatever. All the countries are Mexico, apparently.
Yeah.
Well, as I was saying, sorry about that.
Yeah, you were saying that Mexico copies USA in some term.
No. South America in general, we love copying the USA. Actually, if you come to South America, you will see that many of the main cities are like the USA in the 80s. So that's the idea. Like we try to copy stuff from there. That's why whenever I talk about problems in the USA, I always say, USA, you scare me, and I'm even more scared because here we copy the bad things, and to see that in cultural stuff and religious things, we right now are superior and more advanced than the USA. Totally scares me because I'm sure people will start trying to copy the awful things that the USA is doing. But in the past, it worked in our advantage when we decided, you know what, the USA decided to fight the British. They are not going to be a colony anymore. Why should we be a colony? Look at them. They can do it. We can do it as well. And we did it. And that's how the process started, by copying the USA.
Yes, that makes sense. I mean, I understand that, of course. I mean, at least in South America, independence came roughly in the early 1800s when Spain was firmly troubled by internal things.
Yeah, Napoleon had a big part on that because he kind of left things so weak that in here was like, hey, they are having problems there. They cannot send help really quickly. The USA is doing this. We can do it as well. This is our chance.
Yeah.
I mean, Simon Bolivar was part of the guys.
Yeah, weirdly enough, the Dutch managed to keep Suriname as a colony, and I mean, I was alive when Suriname got independence in 1975. That was a weird thing.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I mean, what I like to talk about is when I was a child in the 1960s, the loss of it was presented in school as the loss of Indonesia was still a traumatic thing, and with a weird story. I mean, essentially, the thing was, of course, that in 1940, in the Second World War, Indonesia became occupied territory of Japan. And the Europeans living there were interned or made prisoners of war, and had a nasty time. It wasn't nice. People died. Not good, but compared to what the Japanese did to the natives, it wasn't so bad. Natives were worked to death by the millions. Japan was terrible in Indonesia.
Yeah, China as well. Like Imperial Japan wasn't the beautiful Japan that we see today. It was very cruel. It was no way. Yeah. That is something I like about Japan. They had a very good turnaround. Like that is also something you can see in Spain. Like they went from Spanish Inquisitions to having one of the most secular nations out there, and in a good way. So yeah, that is a good inspiration. And independence in India was pretty painful as well. And it was during that Indian independence movement when the British started to get directly involved with the fighting and stuff like that, because it started to affect the British directly for a change. And this one. Just like Indonesia, I didn't follow the independence system and the colonialism in Indonesia, but coincidentally, along with not just Indonesia, many the Asian colonies of Britain got independence in a close around time period, because a major effect of that was the Second World War, where Britain lost a lot of resources, and running the colonies was getting tough for them. So they just decided to pull back.
Indochina,
But
yeah, pretty much same. I mean, the Thailand, Burma, but also French Indochina.
yeah.
I mean, French Indochina was a difficult bit, but that also started to the fight for independence after the Second World War. And that's, I mean, the weird thing is that the Dutch in Indonesia, made a war of it. We sent military over to Indonesia to resist the independence movement in 1945. And that went reasonably well, but terribly. I mean, it was terrible fighting, both between military forces of the Dutch and the young Indonesian Republic. But let's say the Dutch were winning, but in 1948, the United States says, that's enough. And when the United States said, that's enough, the Dutch stopped. They were in no position to say no to the US. We were recovering from the Second World War. We were on a money feed through the Marshall Plan. And so, no, we couldn't afford to say no to the US. So we gave independence to Indonesia. But it was highly traumatic. And when I was a kid, it still was a thing. Roughly in the 1970s, we began to re-evaluate both the War of Independence and the colonial period. That it wasn't exactly about extortion, getting as much out as you can, and nothing like people would like to pretend we are educating those people. And there was, particularly from the 1900s, there was a very paternalistic bit to colonization in Indonesia. We're preparing them for independence, but at our pace. When you look at that, it's terrible. And only, let's say, the last 20 years or so, we are also recognizing how deeply racist it was. And we're not done yet on colonialism.
Yeah, true. The effect of World War II on India was a bit mixed effect, because the Britain did not put much effort. Like, they didn't exactly send armies from Britain and stuff like that to fight the independence movement, because they were too busy protecting themselves. Rather, they brought Indian soldiers into Britain to fight their wars and stuff like that. For example, the situation. The situation.
That at one moment, Britain pretty much promised independence to India.
Yeah. It was something more of understanding. Like, I don't think they followed through, because a lot happened in the period. It wasn't just Britain backing out on the promise. It was a mix of a lot of things. But yeah, that was a kind of understanding that Britain came with the main leadership that was leading the independence movement in India. That if you do this for us, then we'll let you go and stuff like that. And stuff happened together, and with the start of the war efforts, the exploitation also increased, because they had to cover up the costs that were going through. That also affected the movement, and then a lot of killing and stuff happened directly by the British to stop the movement. But that was within India. Like, they weren't sent help from Britain for that, because India was too big to handle by just sending army from overseas. And something also, interesting thing also happened in the independence movement where some top like higher bodies of religious organizations were siding with the British against the independence movement of India with the to get a promise of some religious state out of it after the independence and stuff like that, which is very problematic. But what better can you expect from organizations like that? Like the two top names that come in mind is VHP and RSS, like Vishwa Hindu Parishad, and RSS is Rashtra Seva Sangh. I'm not sure if RSS was a thing back then or it was formed later, but VHP was mainly the organization that was negotiating with British to keep India under it and have it turned into a Hindu nation and help them out in the war effort, which is something the current Hindu national government is trying to make people forget, but that did happen, and some people do remember it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those bits. I mean, many years ago, I think 10 years, 15 years ago, I read a biography of India, a history of India, and I mean, it went well into the ancient times and to, let's say, modern India. The most painful thing I got from that is still the partition.
Yeah. Partition is something a very huge stain on the nation, and that is majorly a fuck up from the British. Like while
Yes.
negotiating the independence thing, and it is a bit complicated. So let me just summarize it as much as I can. What happened is the main leadership body that was leading the freedom movement, besides many other smaller organizations into it, was the Indian National Congress, and they were mostly a secular body. Like they were majorly Hindu, but they weren't a Hindu body. Like they had a mixed culture secularism thing, and they took over India after the independence, and they did a good work compared to the neighbors because they weren't a religious body. They had secular ideals and stuff, and but since majority of their audience and their supporters were Hindus, they needed the support of the Muslim population as well. And the governing body, the main leadership body of the Muslim population, agreed to help out in the freedom struggle in support of the INC leadership, was with the promise that they will get a Islamic nation after the independence, and that is where the partition comes in. And so India did ultimately get independence, and so in the contractual thing, Britain decided to be the body that divides the two nations, like the secular Indian nation and the Islamic Pakistan nation. But they just wanted to get it done over with instead of actually doing research about where it is practical, how the line and stuff can be done. So that's just they did a put a cross on the checklist and went away, and then the aftermath was felt where the communities fought against themselves
Yes,
and
yes.
led to a huge genocide. But that is not something you can pinpoint on one person. That just
No, no.
was built. Yeah,
I think if anyone in one person is to blame, it's the British Viceroy then. Mountbatten, I think.
yeah, Mountbatten. If you want to put it on the leadership, then it was mainly two people who had the major role in it. It was the Mountbatten, as you said, the British leadership for India, and the person whose idea partition was, that is Muhammad Jinnah. He was the looked up leadership for the Muslims, although he wasn't exactly a devout Muslim himself. He was I can't call him an atheist, but he wasn't exactly a devoted Muslim. Like yeah, he just was considered a leadership for that population, and but the acting out of the killings and the massacres, something that was a result of the build-up of communal tension that happened under the British period. Like as I said, the British took advantage of the enmity of the two communities and pitted them against each other so that they don't rise together against the British. And that build-up tension ended up to huge scale of massacres after the partition, where the Britain went away and did nothing. Like they didn't care about the aftermath; they
Yeah,
just went away and
exactly.
people killed each other. But there's one particular famine that is fabricated in a way, that is the Bengal famines. I don't know if you heard about it. Like it's not well known outside of India. What happened is, being a colony of India, the Britain captured a lot of the food material produced by India to support the soldiers in the war effort. And one of the main places where they extracted the food material was Bengal, because that's where the main ports were, the ports of Calcutta. It is Kolkata now. Back then it was Calcutta, but they didn't bring back the surplus after the wars and stuff like that. They just under the leadership of Winston Churchill. So he has never been a great person, to be honest. He was just good at railing people and unifying them under the war cry. That's something he has been good at. But he decided not to resupply the surplus that they had, and that led to terrible famines in Bengal, the Bengal famines. So they had a like he had the choice, he had the power and the choice to revert that, but he didn't. He chose not to, although he didn't have to.
Yeah.
It wasn't a necessity.
To this day, Churchill is honorary citizen of my town. Something the town government decided in 1940 something after the liberation. He even has a monument in City Hall. He's greatly admired in my nation, but I know better.
Yeah. And if you look into it, he wasn't exactly that talented of a general either. He was kind of lucky with his military endeavors in the World War scenario, but he was just a good charismatic leader and good at unifying people under the war cry. That was the main good thing that he did in that scenario, that dark days, if I may call it.
But yeah, that was pretty much what World War II did. I mean, it made an end at least to Dutch and British colonialism, and reduced the stature of our nations on the world scene for quite a bit. And I don't think that how things are now, that's a bad thing. But the British need to get used to that idea. Not so good at that. I'm pretty sure that Brexit is mostly, oh my God.
It's interesting the things that I can learn here, guys. We don't get this information down here, so quite informative. Thank you so much. What to say?
Yeah.
I think it's about time to wrap up this episode. I love the conversation. Thank you, Sanrit, for the Indian view. Thank you, Teo, for the Mexican view.
South America. I'm not from Mexico. Mexico is North America.
Okay, sorry, South America. Oh,
Typical,
but
because Spanish, so obviously they are Mexican. So what's Mexico is from North America.
That is funny.
Being the white arsehole. Sorry.
It's cool. You fulfilled your role. Congratulations, sir. Thank you for being white. Thanks for being born under the genetic configuration.
It was a fun conversation.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. You have been amazing. It was a wonderful conversation, and hope to see you soon. And thank you, everybody watching. This was awesome.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.